There once was a man named Percival Tumbleseed, who was, by all reliable accounts, perfectly ordinary except for one small peculiarity: he collected lost afternoons. He kept them in glass jars labeled with days of the week, though nobody ever figured out how he caught them, or why they looked suspiciously like lemon marmalade. One Tuesday that was pretending to be a Thursday, Percival set out for a walk. He wore his best green hat, the one that whispered compliments when it rained, and carried a walking stick that had once been a board branch. The sun was trying its best to rise sideways, which, in the opinion of the nearby pigeons, was a clear sign of adventure. He had been told by an acquaintance, or perhaps by a puddle, that a forest had appeared overnight on the edge of the village. A rather opinionated forest, they'd said. It hums in 7-part harmony and rearranges itself whenever someone sneezes. Percival, being a man of mild curiosity and no immediate appointments, decided this was as good a way as any to misplace an afternoon. The forest did not so much begin as swoop upon him. One moment he was walking across a meadow that smelled like freshly ironed socks, and the next he was surrounded by trees taller than reason and greener than jealousy. Their trunks twisted into improbable knots, and some of them leaned down to whisper things like, "We've been expecting you," or, "Mind the root, it bites." The air was thick with the perfume of moss and something that might have been pancakes. Far off, a brook gurgled a tune that sounded suspiciously like "Rule, Britannia," but in 5/8 time. Percival stopped to take a deep breath and immediately sneezed. The forest shifted. The path beneath him rearranged itself like a deck of cards in a magician's hands. Trees shuffled politely aside, and a new trail appeared, paved with autumn leaves in perfect alphabetical order. "Well," said Percival to no one in particular, "I suppose that's my way forward." "No, backward," said a voice. He looked down and found a toad sitting upon a particularly self-satisfied rock. The toad wore a monocle and a waistcoat of damp moss. Its eyes, large and golden as melted teaspoons, regarded him with faint annoyance. "Beg pardon?" Percival said. "Backward," repeated the toad, "is forward, except when it's sideways. In this forest, directions are a matter of mood, not geography." "Ah," said Percival, nodding as if that made any sense at all. "And what mood is the forest in today?" "Contradictory," said the toad. It had a quarrel with the moon last night. Before Percival could ask for clarification, the toad adjusted its monocle, croaked an operatic farewell, and leapt into a passing cloud of dandelion fluff, which carried it off like a soap bubble. Percival sighed and continued, sideways, as best he could tell. After what may have been an hour or a decade, time was playing hopscotch, he reached a clearing dominated by a colossal teapot. It was porcelain, painted with pictures of marching hedgehogs and flying umbrellas, and large enough that a family of giraffes could have hosted afternoon tea inside with room for a grand piano. From the teapot spout issued a steady stream of steam, which curled into words as it rose, "Welcome, traveler. Mind your manners." The lid lifted itself a fraction, and a small ladder extended down to the ground. Out stepped a creature the size of a watering can, dressed in a suit of tea leaves and carrying a clipboard. "Name?" the creature demanded, adjusting a pair of spectacles that seemed made of frost. "Percival Tumbleseed." "Purpose of visit?" "I'm exploring," Percival said. "Or perhaps wandering. I'm never quite sure which." "Exploration requires intent," said the tea-leaf clerk. "Wandering requires whimsy. Which do you have in greater supply?" Percival considered this. "Whimsy, I think." "Excellent. You'll fit right in. Please take a seat inside. Tea will be served shortly, along with a riddle and a mild existential crisis." The clerk ushered him up the ladder, into the teapot. Inside, it was larger than logic would permit. Chandeliers of dangling teaspoons glittered from the ceiling. The walls were lined with books that smelled faintly of bergamot. In the center of the room sat a long table set for tea, though the teacups were filled with peculiar things, rainbows, fragments of yesterday's gossip, and something that might have been bottled laughter. At the head of the table sat an owl wearing an apron. "Welcome," hooted the owl. "You're just in time for the unbirthday service. Do you prefer your tea philosophical, metaphorical, or emotionally turbulent?" "Metaphorical, please," said Percival. Excellent choice, said the owl, pouring him a cup of liquid that shimmered like moonlight on ink. It tastes like understanding, but only for a moment. Percival sipped. His mind filled with the sudden conviction that spoons were secretly plotting against forks, but before he could articulate this revelation, the taste faded. You'll find, said the owl, that this forest doesn't make sense because it doesn't want to. Sense is far too predictable. We prefer interpretation. That sounds exhausting, Percival said. Oh, terribly, said the owl cheerfully. But it's never dull. Now then, your riddle. It produced a scroll from somewhere beneath its wing and unrolled it with a flourish. I am the path that follows you. I vanish in the dark, return with the dew. Step on me gently, I may be awake. Guess me, traveler, for curiosity's sake. Percival frowned. A shadow? The owl's eyes sparkled. No, but that's a sensible guess, which makes it wrong. The answer, of course, is Tuesday. You stepped on one earlier. Before he could argue, the entire teapot gave a polite burp, the floor tilted 40 degrees, and Percival slid neatly out the door and into the forest again. He landed in a bed of whispering ferns that giggled like schoolchildren. The sky above had changed colors, lavender melting into sherbet orange, and the trees now wore lanterns made of captured moonlight. Percival sat up, brushed the starlight from his coat, and decided that this was indeed an excellent place to lose another afternoon. Far off, the brook changed key and began humming something suspiciously like the overture to an opera about onions. And somewhere deep within the forest, a door was waiting for him, though, being a door, it had absolutely no intention of explaining why. The forest had a peculiar habit of pretending it wasn't there whenever Percival blinked. He'd close his eyes for a moment and, blink, the trees would shuffle 6 feet to the left, the sky would swap colors with the moss, and the path would rearrange itself into calligraphy that spelled out mildly judgmental remarks like, "You really should be wearing different shoes." Percival ignored this, as one must when the scenery develops opinions. He pressed onward, humming to himself an uncertain melody that went, "La-di-a Tweedledum," because any proper tune had long since gotten lost. The ferns giggled again as he passed, and one of them reached out a front to pat his knee. "Mind yourself," it whispered, "the door's in one of its moods." "What sort of mood?" asked Percival, stopping politely to address the plant. "The sort that opens and closes on principle," said the fern, shaking slightly as though scandalized. "Doesn't care who's on which side, just enjoys the gesture of it." "Ah," said Percival, nodding gravely. "I've met politicians like that." He followed the faint smell of keys and sawdust until he came upon a clearing lit by hundreds of floating doorknobs. In the middle stood a large wooden door, freestanding, unattached to any wall, tree, or concept of architecture. Its frame was carved with tiny running shoes and its hinges gleamed with self-importance. As Percival approached, the door rattled meaningfully. "Good morning," said Percival, tipping his green hat. "Are you the door?" "A door," it replied in a creaky baritone, "but the one you're looking for, yes. At least for now. People tend to look for me when they don't know what they've lost." "That's rather poetic," said Percival. "I've been taking evening classes," said the door modestly. "Shall I open?" "If you wouldn't mind." "Oh, I would mind," said the door, "but I'll do it anyway. Professional courtesy." It swung open with a dramatic sigh. Beyond it lay another forest, though subtly wrong. The trees there had square leaves and murmured in Morse code. The sky was plaid. A rabbit wearing a waistcoat made of clock faces hopped past, muttering, 3 o'clock already, though it's barely 1/2 past. Percival stepped through. Instantly, his pockets rearranged themselves. He now carried a small brass telescope, a slice of toast, and a note that read, "For emergencies of narrative inconsistency only." He pocketed the note carefully. The door slammed behind him with a triumphant thunk, and a voice from the other side called, "No returns or exchanges." Percival was alone, except for a chorus of mushrooms arguing nearby. "I'm telling you," one insisted, "the moon is just a reflective biscuit." "That's preposterous," said another, "everyone knows it's a cheese wheel powered by tides." "Cheese doesn't glow," said a third, unless you've left it out too long, which the moon clearly hasn't. Percival coughed politely. Excuse me, might I trouble you for directions? The mushrooms turned in unison. Directions to where? That's the trouble, said Percival. I don't rightly know. Ah, said the first mushroom. Then you need the cartographer of nowhere. He maps what doesn't exist, explained the second. And misplaces what does, added the third. He lives just beyond the river that dreams in reverse. That sounds complicated, said Percival. Oh, terribly, said the mushrooms together. But you'll enjoy it. They pointed him toward a narrow trail lined with forgetful flowers. Each time Percival passed one, it promptly forgot it had ever bloomed, folded itself into a bud again, and started the whole process anew. He whistled softly, half in wonder and half to reassure himself that he still made noise. The air shimmered faintly, as though uncertain whether it wanted to be liquid or dream. Soon, he reached the river that dreams in reverse. It flowed uphill, of course, murmuring in its sleep about events that hadn't happened yet. He leaned over to listen and caught fragments of tomorrow. Umbrella revolt at noon. The owl takes up tap dancing. Percival Tumbleseed discovers. But before he could hear what he was supposed to discover, a fish with spectacles leapt from the water and splashed him directly in the face. No spoilers, croaked the fish indignantly before diving back in. Percival wiped his glasses. He didn't wear any, but that seemed the polite thing to do, and noticed a peculiar bridge spanning the river. It was made of letters, literal alphabetic planks, spelling out a sentence that read, "This bridge is slightly nervous but willing." Good to know, said Percival, stepping onto it carefully. The letters quivered beneath his feet. Mind your step, squeaked an S. We don't usually carry people, only metaphors. I'll be gentle, he promised. When he reached the other side, the forest was humming again, a deep, contented sound like the purr of a satisfied planet. In the middle of a clearing stood a hut made entirely of maps. Not of paper, but living maps that fluttered and shifted, rearranging their borders as if playing a game of geography's musical chairs. A man with a beard made of tangled string sat on the porch, sketching nonsense onto a compass. Are you the cartographer of nowhere? Asked Percival. Some days, said the man without looking up. Other days I'm his understudy. I was told you could help me find where I'm going. The cartographer frowned, dipping his quill into what appeared to be moonlight. That depends. Are you trying to get somewhere or anywhere? I suppose, anywhere. Excellent, said the cartographer, perking up. Anywhere is much easier to locate than somewhere. Somewhere requires coordinates. Anywhere only requires mood swings. He handed Percival a small, square piece of parchment. On it was drawn a single dot labeled U and a very long squiggle labeled also U, but later. This is your map, said the cartographer. It will only tell you where you've been, but never where you are. That doesn't sound useful. Precisely, said the cartographer, beaming. That's why it's accurate. He waved his hand, and the hut folded itself neatly into a paper crane, which flapped once and flew away, scattering spare punctuation as it went. Percival looked down at his new map. The dot labeled U wobbled uncertainly, then began crawling toward the edge of the parchment as if eager to escape. He sighed, tucked it into his pocket, and continued along a path that hadn't existed a moment earlier. The forest darkened, though not ominously, more like it had simply forgotten how to glow. Fireflies drifted through the air, spelling cryptic phrases such as, "Ask the hourglass about the rain," and "Do not trust the spoons." Percival followed the glimmers until he reached another clearing, this one silent except for the distant ticking of invisible clocks. In the center stood a table made of melted timepieces and, upon it, an hourglass that was steadily raining upward. "Excuse me," said Percival to the hourglass. "Do you happen to know where this path leads?" The hourglass paused mid-rain, considering him through its narrow neck. "That depends," it said slowly, "on whether you're asking in past tense, present, or potential." "Potential, I think," said Percival. "Then it leads," said the hourglass, "to a place that hasn't decided what it's called yet." Percival sighed. "That sounds about right." The hourglass tilted, spilling a few moments onto the ground. "Take these," it said kindly. "You'll need them later." Percival gathered the scattered moments, which looked like soap bubbles filled with memories he didn't recognize, and placed them carefully in his pocket. And somewhere behind him, the door sighed, turned its hinges inside out, and whispered to itself, "He's getting warmer." Percival followed the path that hadn't made up its mind. It twisted lazily through groves of whispering birches and sighed every few paces, as though walking him were a tremendous favor. The hourglass moments in his pocket glimmered faintly, chiming whenever he thought too hard. After what may have been 3 minutes or an entire afternoon, he emerged from the trees into a peculiar sort of village. The sign at its entrance read, "The Village of Borrowed Tomorrows. Please return all days in original packaging." The houses looked halfway awake. Their windows blinked drowsily, and their chimneys stretched as if yawning. A breeze drifted through the streets, carrying the faint scent of toast and déjà vu. Percival stepped cautiously onto a cobblestone that introduced itself in a gravelly voice, "Mind the cracks. They gossip." "About what?" asked Percival. "Oh, mostly the weather and unfulfilled prophecies." Sure enough, a nearby crack muttered, "Rain by Wednesday, mark my words," to which another replied, "It's always Wednesday somewhere." Percival decided not to get involved in local politics and continued onward. The villagers were stranger still. One woman carried a basket of tomorrows, bright and glowing like captured soap bubbles. A man was polishing a bicycle that seemed intent on riding itself backwards. A child drew shapes in the dust that rose into the air and flew away as birds of punctuation, commas and semicolons fluttering their little wings. Percival approached the woman with the glowing basket. "Excuse me," he said. "I seem to have misplaced my way. Could you tell me where I might find it?" "That depends," said the woman, whose eyes contained faint calendar markings. "Have you borrowed tomorrow yet?" "I don't believe I have." "Then you can't go forward," she said matter-of-factly. "We run on borrowed time here. You'll have to speak with the cranamonger." "Where might I find him?" "Where else?" She pointed down the street to a crooked tower stitched together from cuckoo clocks, hourglasses, and dangling pendulums. "Just follow the ticking and try not to contradict yourself." Percival thanked her and set off. The road ahead tried to loop behind him twice but eventually gave up. The tower's door was round and polite. It opened before he could knock. Inside was a shop that smelled of dust, ink, and potential. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with bottled seconds, rolled up minutes, and jars labeled, "Tuesday, half used." Behind the counter sat a man who might have been a clock once. His beard was made of frayed watch chains, his eyes ticked in sync, and his hands moved with mechanical precision even when he wasn't moving at all. "Good afternoon," said Percival. "Incorrect," said the man without looking up. "It's the middle of a hesitation. Very fragile time, try not to breathe too confidently. I was told you're the cranamonger." "Indeed," said the man, winding his beard absently. "Keeper, trader, and lender of hours, minutes, and speculative moments. What are you in need of?" "I believe I've lost my way." "Ah," said the cranamonger with satisfaction. "A common temporal ailment. You'll need a loan of tomorrow to continue. Do you have any collateral?" "I'm afraid not." "Not even a spare regret?" "Those fetch excellent rates." Percival patted his pockets and produced the hourglass moments the previous creature had given him. "I have these," he said. The cranamonger's eyes brightened. "Freshly unspent." "That'll do nicely." He took the moments, sniffed one, and nodded. "Center possibility, grade A quality." He placed them into a tiny brass contraption shaped like a calendar and wound it once. There was a soft ding, and a slip of parchment slid out bearing the words, "Tomorrow, on loan. Due back by last Wednesday." "Thank you," said Percival, though he wasn't sure for what. "You'll find the road ahead has opinions," said the cranamonger. "Keep your tomorrow close, or it might start talking about you behind your back." He handed Percival a delicate bubble, inside of which swirled colors that hadn't yet been invented. "Your borrowed day. Handle gently." Percival took it, bowed, and stepped outside. The air seemed to shimmer, everything tilted slightly as if the world had remembered something it had forgotten. The villagers smiled as he passed. Their baskets of tomorrows jingled softly, like wind chimes made of optimism. A cat with a wristwatch collar followed him for several paces, muttering something about deadlines. At the edge of the village, the path resumed, but it looked different now. It gleamed faintly, as though it too had borrowed some time. Percival stepped onto it, and the bubble in his hand pulsed warmly. Immediately, the forest ahead unfolded like a paper fan. Trees bowed, shadows whispered invitations, and the scent of rain before it happened drifted through the air. He walked. And as he did, the bubble of borrowed tomorrow floated from his hand, bobbing along beside him like a loyal balloon. Every so often it would whisper advice such as, "Turn left in 5 minutes," or, "Don't trust the mirrors." After a while, the forest thinned, revealing a meadow carpeted in clocks. Some lay half buried in the grass, others hung from invisible hooks in the sky. Their ticking formed a melody, as though the entire clearing were conducting time's rehearsal. Percival sat on a rock shaped suspiciously like a question mark. "I wonder," he said aloud, "what happens if I simply stop walking?" "You fall out of the story," said the bubble helpfully. "And what's beneath it?" "Footnotes," said the bubble. "Unpleasant place. Smells of unfinished sentences." Percival decided to keep walking. As he rose, he noticed a shadow that wasn't his own trailing beside him. It was taller, thinner, and seemed to be humming a song backward. "Excuse me," he said to it. "Are you following me?" "I'm leading you," said the shadow, affronted. "Don't flatter yourself." "Where to?" "To the edge of meaning. Everyone gets there eventually, though most people take the scenic route." "And what lies beyond?" The shadow smiled, a curious thing for a shape. "Depends on whether you've learned to read upside down." It drifted ahead, and Percival followed. The trees began to thin again until they became silhouettes of themselves, outlines drawn in faint charcoal against a deepening sky. Somewhere far behind, the village of borrowed tomorrows ticked contentedly on. Before him stretched a wide field filled with tall, whispering reeds that bent not with the wind, but with the rhythm of unheard music. In the distance, a faint light flickered, half lantern, half star, entirely uncertain of its identity. The bubble of tomorrow drifted upward, glowing brighter. "That's where your next question lives," it said. "My next question?" "Of course. You can't find what you're looking for until you know what you want to ask." Percival sighed. "And do you know what that question is?" The bubble considered. "No. But I suspect it rhymes with why." And before he could ask anything else, the bubble popped, scattering tiny fragments of light that rose like sparks into the indigo air. Percival was left holding nothing but the echo of possibility. So he stepped forward, into the field of whispering reeds, where the air itself seemed to be waiting for a thought worth having. The field of whispering reeds stretched as far as Percival's imagination allowed, which, on good days, was considerably far. Each reed bent not with the breeze but with ideas, murmuring half-thoughts as he passed. One sighed, perhaps, another breathed, unless, and a third muttered, "But what if Tuesdays are sentient?" He moved carefully through them, not wanting to disturb any unfinished sentences. Somewhere ahead shimmered that uncertain light he'd glimpsed before, neither star nor lantern, but something hovering delicately between sense and suggestion. As he drew nearer, the reeds began harmonizing softly, as though rehearsing for a question they couldn't quite remember. Then he saw it, a pedestal of polished fog, upon which rested a crystal sphere filled with swirling punctuation marks. Question marks drifted lazily inside like curious fish. "Hello?" Percival said, because that's what one does when confronted with floating grammar. The sphere quivered, released a polite cough, and said, "Ah. There you are. Took you long enough. Were you expecting me?" "Of course. I'm everyone's question eventually. I've simply been misplaced for a while." Percival frowned. "What question are you?" "That," said the sphere, "is precisely the question." It looked rather pleased with itself. He circled the pedestal, hoping for a label or instruction manual. Finding none, he asked, "What am I meant to do with you?" "Remember me," said the question. "I forgot my own answer ages ago, and I need someone to wonder me back into existence." "I'll try," said Percival. "How does one remember a question one's never asked?" "By listening sideways," said the question. "Everything makes sense when overheard incorrectly." Percival thought about that until his head felt pleasantly overstuffed. Then, tentatively, he placed his hand on the sphere. Immediately, the world tilted. The reeds bowed deeply. The sky rearranged its punctuation. And suddenly he was standing, not in the forest, but in a room made entirely of mirrors. Each mirror showed a different version of him, one younger, one older, one made entirely of feathers, and one busily attempting to invent marmalade. "Don't worry," said the question's voice, echoing around him. "These are just reflections of who you might have been, if you turned left a few chapters ago." "They look busy," said Percival. "They are. Most possibilities are terribly industrious." He watched the reflections move. The older Percival was sweeping up discarded afternoons, the same sort he'd once collected. The feathered one was flying in slow, elegant circles. The marmalade inventor had accidentally turned his hat into a teapot and was quite proud of it. Then Percival noticed one mirror that remained fogged, as though shy. He reached out to wipe it clean, and gasped. This mirror showed no reflection at all. Only the forest, stretching endlessly, its trees leaning towards something unseen. "What's this one?" he asked. "That's the answer I forgot," said the question softly. "It's still hiding. Can I find it?" "Possibly. But be warned, answers are slippery things. They prefer being chased to being caught." Percival stepped through the mirror before he could talk himself out of it. He found himself back among trees, but they were different now, thinner, quieter, as if drawn in pencil. The air shimmered with erased thoughts. Somewhere nearby, a faint ticking, like the Kranemunger's clocks, grew louder, though less certain of itself. A small creature approached, a fox made entirely of folded paper, inked with diagrams and half-finished poems. Its eyes were commas, its tail, an exclamation mark. "Lost?" it asked. "Probably," said Percival. "Good. You're on the right page, then." The fox circled him once. "You're looking for an answer, aren't you?" "Yes." "Tricky business. The forest's full of them, all pretending to be questions until someone notices. Do you know where mine might be hiding?" The fox tilted its head. "Possibly with the echo tree. It keeps other people's certainties for safekeeping." "And where might I find that?" "Follow the sound of something you almost remember," said the fox, and trotted off into its own sentence, vanishing mid-clause. Percival closed his eyes and listened. For a while he heard nothing but the gentle rustle of maybe. Then, faintly, a tune drifted to him, the same sideways song the brook had once hummed near the start of his adventure. He followed it. The trees grew taller and more transparent until he reached a clearing filled with floating fragments of his own voice. They drifted like soap bubbles, repeating things he'd said earlier. "You the door, metaphorical, please, I'll try." In the center stood the echo tree. It was enormous and entirely hollow, filled with voices looping endlessly. Its bark shimmered with words that had once been spoken and then forgotten. "Excuse me," said Percival, stepping closer. The echo tree answered with his own voice, but slightly mispronounced. "Excuse me. Have you seen an answer around here?" "An answer, round here," echoed the tree, then paused. "Oh? That answer?" Its tone turned conspiratorial. "Yes, it came by earlier. Said it was tired of being correct and wandered off to reinvent itself as a possibility. Do you know where it went?" "Beyond the punctuation hills," said the tree, creaking. "But take care, people who reach the end of the sentence seldom come back quite the same." "I've already changed several times," said Percival cheerfully. "I'm practically a paragraph." The echo tree chuckled, shedding a few vowels. "Then off you go, Mr. Tumbleseed. Mind your tenses." He thanked it and walked on. The forest gradually thinned until it gave way to rolling hills dotted with enormous commas, semicolons, and question marks sprouting from the ground like strange vegetation. The path curved upward, ending abruptly at a single full stop, a stone disc gleaming in the twilight. Percival stood before it, uncertain. "Is this the end?" he asked. "Only if you stop reading," said a familiar voice. The shadow from earlier reappeared, taller and darker than before. "Have you found your question?" it asked. "I think so." "And your answer?" "Not yet." The shadow nodded. "Then perhaps the answer is that you don't need one." "That seems unsatisfying," said Percival. "Good," said the shadow. "Satisfaction ends stories." It gestured toward the horizon, where the sky folded into shades of lavender and ink. "Walk on." "The forest isn't finished speaking." Percival hesitated, then stepped onto the full stop. The ground trembled slightly, then began to unfold, revealing more words, stretching outward like a scroll. He realized, with a small smile, that the story itself was making room for him. And somewhere, far behind, the question whispered faintly, "Almost there." The world unfurled beneath Percival's feet like a freshly written sentence, the ink still glistening. He walked upon words, phrases, and punctuation marks that shimmered underfoot. Some muttered as he stepped on them, mostly complaints about grammar, while others giggled softly, proud to be part of something larger. The sky above had traded its colors again, it was now the precise hue of a forgotten dream. The moon hung crookedly, wearing spectacles it clearly didn't need. Far in the distance, Percival saw the outline of trees, taller, grander, more deliberate than any forest he'd yet encountered. He realized, with a flutter of nervous excitement, that he had returned, or perhaps arrived at last, at the heart of the forest of almost meaning. The trees greeted him with a slow, rustling applause. "Welcome back," they whispered. "Have I been here before?" he asked, uncertain. "Yes," said the trees. "But differently." He looked around. The forest had changed since his first visit. The leaves now glowed faintly from within, as though illuminated by half-remembered thoughts. The brook's melody had matured into a full symphony, its waters forming notes that rose into the air and popped like bubbles of music. Even the air itself hummed with quiet purpose, as if about to reveal something it had been holding in since the dawn of logic. Percival adjusted his green hat, which whispered, looking dashing, as always, and took a deep breath. "Forest," he said aloud, "I've followed your riddles and your rivers, your doors and your shadows. I've met tea-drinking owls and time-hoarding merchants. I've misplaced my way several times and found it even more. But I still don't quite know why I'm here." The trees swayed gently. "Do you need to know?" Percival hesitated. "Well, it would help." "Would it?" asked a nearby oak, its voice deep and mossy. "Meaning is a heavy coat, dear traveler. You wear it only when the nonsense gets cold." Before Percival could argue, the ground rippled. A dozen paths unspooled around him like ribbons, all leading in different directions, but each labeled the same, somewhere else. A familiar figure stepped out from between the trees. It was the toad he'd met on his first day, monocle gleaming, waistcoat of moss freshly ironed. "Back again, said the toad, eyeing him with wry amusement. "So it seems," said Percival. "Good. You're right on schedule. I didn't know I had one." "No one does," said the toad. "Makes punctuality far more exciting." The toad hopped onto a nearby rock that immediately started humming accompaniment. "Well, then, let's see what you've learned. What did you find beyond the door?" "Another forest." "And beyond the village?" "Time on loan." "And beyond the reeds?" "A question." The toad smiled. "Ah. And what have you brought back?" Percival opened his mouth, but no words came out. He reached into his pockets instead and found the strangest collection of souvenirs imaginable, the folded map from the cartographer of nowhere, the empty bubble of borrowed tomorrow, a handful of hourglass moments, and one faintly glowing question mark from the crystal sphere. He held them out in his hands. "I suppose I brought possibilities." "Excellent," said the toad. That's all anyone ever takes from this forest. He hopped closer, his monocle reflecting 1,000 trees at once. Tell me, Mr. Tumbleseed, do you still wish for the forest to make sense? Percival looked around. The trees shimmered like unspoken thoughts, the brook sang counterpoint to the stars, and even the air seemed to giggle softly at the notion of logic. No, he said at last. I think if it did, it wouldn't be nearly as wonderful. The toad gave a satisfied croak. Well said. Then you've earned your way home. Home? Percival repeated. But where? Before he could finish, the ground sighed, and a familiar door appeared before him, the same one that had once refused to stay closed. Its hinges gleamed, its carvings danced, and this time, it looked almost fond. Leaving so soon? It asked. I don't think I ever left, said Percival. Precisely, said the door. Ready? I suppose I must be. The door swung open. On the other side lay the same meadow where his adventure had begun, the grass golden, the sky undecided between blue and lavender. He could see the faint outline of his own footprints leading away into the ordinary world. Before stepping through, he turned back. The forest seemed to lean in closer, as though listening. Thank you, he said softly. For what? Asked the trees. For the nonsense, said Percival. It's been exactly what I didn't know I needed. The toad tipped his mossy hat. Do try to lose another afternoon sometime, he said. We're always accepting visitors with poor sense of direction. Percival laughed and stepped through the door. At once, the air shifted. The scent of moss and teacups faded. The birds resumed their normal, slightly judgmental songs. The world felt smaller, more explainable. He stood for a moment in the quiet meadow, his hat still whispering compliments. The sun was precisely where it ought to be, and time seemed to have decided on a reasonable speed again. He looked down at his hands. The trinkets from the forest were gone, save for one. A single, tiny question mark rested in his palm, glowing faintly before fading into the air like a sigh. He smiled. When he returned home, he placed an empty jar on his windowsill, labeled neatly in his own careful handwriting. The afternoon I found almost meaning. From that day on, whenever someone asked him where he'd been, he would smile and say, "Oh, just out exploring the obvious," and leave it at that. And sometimes, late at night, he would hear the faintest sound from the edge of the woods, a brook humming, a door sighing, a toad clearing its throat for another story. He would tip his hat toward the darkness and whisper, "Not yet. But soon." And the forest, though too far away to be heard, would smile back through the trees. Because in the forest of almost meaning, endings were merely pauses. And every pause, if you listened sideways, sounded suspiciously like the beginning of something else.